the quiet error that precedes every reaction. Consider this carefully before anything else. What disturbs you is not the event in front of you. It is the silent movement that happens before you respond to it. Something occurs. A word is spoken. A delay appears. An obstacle interrupts your plan. None of this carries disturbance on its own. Disturbance begins only when the mind assigns meaning and urgency where none is required. This is not a comforting claim. It removes excuses. It denies the mind its habit of blaming circumstances, people, timing, or fate. If events themselves caused agitation, then every person would react the same way to the same situation. They do not. The difference is judgment. You are accustomed to believing that reaction is automatic, that emotion forces the response. But this skips over a crucial moment. Before any raised voice, before any sharp message, before any inner resentment, there is a quiet agreement. The mind accepts an impression as true, necessary, or personal. That agreement happens quickly, often unnoticed. Yet it is the only point where responsibility exists. Stoic discipline begins here. Not by suppressing feeling. Not by controlling others. But by learning to see the instant where judgment enters and reaction follows. This is the first silent mistake, forgetting that you have a choice before assent. No part of this can be outsourced. No circumstance can be blamed. If freedom is possible at all, it exists only at this point. Hold this distinction, the boundary you keep crossing. Everything that follows depends on one clear distinction. There is a boundary you cross repeatedly without noticing. On one side is what belongs to you. On the other is what never did. Most reactions are born not from weakness, but from confusion at this line. What belongs to you is limited, but precise. Your judgments. Your intentions. Your choices. Your willingness or refusal to agree with what appears in the mind. These are internal acts. They do not require permission. They are not delayed by circumstance. They cannot be taken by force. What does not belong to you is everything else. The behavior of other people. The timing of events. Outcomes. Recognition. Tone. Delays. Praise. Disrespect. These things arrive and depart without consulting you. Treating them as if they were yours is the source of continual friction. Discipline fails when this boundary is blurred. Effort is wasted trying to manage what never submits to effort. Resentment grows where responsibility was misplaced. You feel pressured, invaded, or cornered, not because you lack control, but because you are trying to exercise it where it does not exist. Consider a simple moment. Someone interrupts you while you are speaking. The interruption is not yours. The sound reached your ears without your consent. But the meaning you attach to it is entirely yours. You might judge it as disrespect, dismissal, or threat. Or you might judge it as noise, impatience, or ignorance. The interruption is the same. The reaction is not. Another example appears with delay. You expect a reply. Hours pass. Nothing arrives. The silence is not yours. It contains no message. Yet the mind fills it immediately. Disinterest. Rejection. Disrespect. Now the body tightens. The mood shifts. The disturbance feels justified. But it was self-generated through a judgment that crossed the boundary. This confusion feels convincing because it is habitual. From an early age, the mind is trained to believe that external conditions determine internal states. When things go well, calm appears. When they do not, agitation follows. This pattern feels natural, but it is not necessary. Stoic discipline begins by refusing this assumption. It does not claim that events disappear or become pleasant. It claims something narrower and more demanding, that events do not command your judgment unless you grant them authority. This is not indifference. It is accuracy. You still register what happens. You still perceive difficulty. You still feel the initial movement of impression. But you do not confuse perception with ownership. You do not treat what happens as if it reached inside and rearranged your mind. Most people live as if the boundary were reversed. They guard outcomes fiercely and neglect judgments entirely. They spend energy rehearsing arguments, predicting behavior, and managing impressions, while leaving their own assent unexamined. When disturbance appears, they look outward for causes and solutions. The Stoic reversal is uncompromising. It places full responsibility where it can actually operate. If judgment is yours, then reaction is yours. If reaction is yours, then discipline is possible. Not through force, but through clarity. This boundary does not promise ease. It removes complaint. Once you see clearly what belongs to you, you can no longer claim that anger, bitterness, or impulsive speech were imposed. They were allowed. This recognition is uncomfortable, but it is stabilizing. When this distinction is ignored, life feels like a series of intrusions. When it is respected, pressure reduces even if circumstances remain unchanged. You stop negotiating with what cannot hear you and begin working where effort produces results. This boundary is the foundation. Without it, every technique becomes fragile. With it, reaction slows, not because you are suppressing something, but because you are no longer confused about what requires your involvement. This explains where effort is misplaced, but not yet how disturbance takes hold, the moment you give agreement. Now we look at what actually creates disturbance. Every reaction follows the same internal sequence, whether you notice it or not. First, an impression appears. A sound, an image, a phrase, a delay, a look on someone's face. This happens automatically. You do not choose it. The mind receives impressions the way the eyes receive light. The mistake begins when this first movement is treated as a verdict. An impression is not yet a judgment. It is only a report. This happened. That was said. This did not arrive. By itself, it carries no demand. It does not instruct you to feel insulted, threatened, or wronged. Those instructions are added later. After the impression comes interpretation. The mind proposes a meaning. This is disrespect. This means I am ignored. This should not be happening. These thoughts often arrive so quickly that they feel fused with the impression itself. But they are not the same thing. Between impression and reaction sits a critical act, assent. Assent is the moment you agree with the interpretation. You say yes to it. You accept it as accurate, necessary, or urgent. This is the first silent mistake before every reaction. The mind does not pause to check whether the judgment is required. It simply consents. Impressions arrive uninvited. Assent does not. This distinction matters because it is the only point where freedom operates. You cannot prevent impressions. You cannot stop thoughts from proposing meanings. But you are not required to approve them. The pause before assent may be brief, but it exists. Consider criticism. Someone comments on your work. The impression arrives as sound. Neutral. Then the interpretation appears, they are undermining me. If you assent to this, the body tightens. Defense forms. Speech sharpens. The reaction feels justified. But nothing forced it. You agreed to a particular meaning and responded accordingly. Or consider delay. A plan is interrupted. The impression is time passing without progress. Then the judgment, this is a problem. This is unacceptable. Assent follows. Irritation grows. The situation has not changed, but your internal state has. Stoic discipline does not deny emotion. It denies the automatic authority of judgment. Feeling often follows assent, not the other way around. The belief that emotion compels agreement reverses the sequence and removes responsibility. This is why telling yourself to calm down fails. The assent has already occurred. The judgment is already installed. The body is responding to a conclusion you accepted without examination. Training begins by restoring the correct order. Impression first. Judgment proposed. Assent optional. The optional nature of assent is uncomfortable to acknowledge. It means reactions are not accidents. They are decisions made quickly, habitually, and without scrutiny. This is why progress feels difficult. You are not fighting circumstances. You are interrupting a habit of agreement. The pause does not need to be dramatic. One breath is enough. One moment of withholding approval. You do not need to replace the judgment with a positive one. You only need to refrain from endorsing the first interpretation offered. This impression may be incomplete. This meaning may not be required. I will not agree yet. This is discipline at its most basic level. Not force. Not suppression. Just refusal to rush assent. Understanding this mechanism is clarifying, but clarity alone does not produce stability. Seeing the moment of assent does not guarantee you will catch it under pressure. Habits formed over years do not dissolve through insight alone. Understanding this does not create discipline. What discipline actually trains? This is where most people misunderstand discipline. Discipline is commonly imagined as force applied against resistance. Teeth clenched. Emotion suppressed. Reaction delayed through sheer effort. This model fails because it treats discipline as an emergency response rather than a trained capacity. Force appears only when training is absent. Stoic discipline is not the ability to endure pressure longer than others. It is the ability to recognize impressions earlier than others. What is trained is attention, not endurance. Precision, not toughness. The mind reacts quickly because it has practiced reacting quickly. It has rehearsed agreement thousands of times. Every unexamined assent strengthens the habit. When pressure arrives, the response feels inevitable because it has been practiced into inevitability. Training reverses this, but not through confrontation. You do not argue with impressions. You do not suppress emotion. You train the space before agreement so that reaction no longer feels compulsory. This is why discipline cannot begin at the moment of crisis. By then, the habit has already taken over. The mind is executing a familiar sequence. Trying to intervene with willpower at that point is like trying to steer after impact. Training happens before pressure. Stoic practice, often called ascesis, is repetitive, quiet, and unimpressive. It does not look like heroic restraint. It looks like noticing small movements of judgment throughout the day and declining to endorse them. You are not training yourself to feel nothing. That is neither possible nor required. Impressions will still arrive. Emotions will still surface. The body will still register discomfort. Discipline trains something narrower and more precise, the refusal to confuse sensation with necessity. Consider irritation. The feeling appears. This is natural. Discipline does not eliminate it. What discipline interrupts is the conclusion that irritation must be acted upon, expressed, or justified. That conclusion is learned. And anything learned can be unlearned through practice. This is why repetition matters more than intensity. Each time you notice an impression and delay assent, even briefly, you weaken the habit of automatic agreement. Each time you fail to notice it, the habit continues. There is no moral victory or failure here. Only training data. Most people wait for high-stakes situations to practice discipline. They attempt control only when anger feels dangerous or consequences feel serious. This is too late. Training must occur when little is at stake. A minor inconvenience. A small delay. A comment that barely matters. These are not interruptions to life. They are the training ground. In these moments, you can practice without drama. You can observe the proposed judgment without adopting it. You can allow the impression to exist without resolving it into a verdict. This is how capacity is built. Force creates exhaustion. Training creates reliability. The goal is not perfection. The goal is familiarity with the pause. Over time, the pause becomes accessible under greater pressure, not because you are stronger, but because you are practiced. Discipline does not harden you. It clarifies you. It does not remove feeling. It removes confusion about what feeling requires. This distinction matters because many abandon Stoic practice when they still feel emotion. They assume failure. In fact, emotion was never the target. Unexamined assent was. When discipline is understood as training attention, not suppressing reaction, the work becomes sustainable, quiet, ongoing, available in ordinary moments. Training remains abstract unless it appears in daily life, where practice enters the day. This practice is proven in ordinary moments. Stoic discipline does not wait for conflict, confrontation, or emotional intensity. It operates where attention is usually lowest. Small moments. Repeated moments. Moments that seem unimportant enough to ignore. This is where training either exists or does not. Daily practice has three simple forms. None are dramatic. None require special conditions. Each one targets the same point, the pause before assent. The first is anticipating impressions without anxiety. This does not mean expecting the worst or rehearsing disaster. It means acknowledging reality with accuracy. Delays will occur. People will misunderstand you. Plans will be interrupted. Technology will fail. Bodies will tire. These are not personal events. They are ordinary features of life. When you fail to anticipate this, each inconvenience feels like an exception. The mind reacts with surprise and protest. This should not be happening. That judgment intensifies disturbance before you have a chance to respond. Anticipation removes the shock, not the difficulty. You are not bracing emotionally. You are clarifying expectations. When the impression arrives, it meets a prepared mind rather than a protesting one. The second practice is pausing before assent. This is the core discipline. It does not require long reflection. One breath is enough. One moment of withholding agreement. You do not need to decide what the impression means. You only need to refuse to decide immediately. The mind will pressure you to conclude quickly. It will frame urgency as necessity. This is habit speaking. The pause interrupts the sequence without confrontation. You might notice the judgment arise clearly. This is unfair. This is disrespect. This should be fixed now. The practice is not to argue. It is to delay consent. Let the thought remain unapproved. In this pause, reaction loosens. The body may still register tension. That is acceptable. What matters is that you did not authorize the conclusion that demands expression or action. The third practice is evening review without guilt or praise. At the end of the day, you recall moments where assent was given too quickly and moments where it was withheld. This is not a moral audit. There is no self-congratulation and no self-accusation. Guilt is itself an unexamined judgment. Praise is another. Both distract from observation. You simply note patterns. Where did impression turn into reaction without pause? Where did you remember to withhold agreement? This review strengthens awareness without creating pressure. It trains recognition, not identity. The purpose is continuity. Discipline fails when it becomes episodic, intense for a few days and then abandoned. Quiet review keeps practice grounded and ongoing. These practices work together. Anticipation reduces surprise. The pause restores choice. Review builds familiarity. None eliminate difficulty. All reduce unnecessary disturbance. Importantly, these practices do not require isolation or ideal conditions. They are designed for real days, with interruptions, fatigue, and imperfection. Missing a pause does not undo training. It simply reveals where attention slipped. Consistency matters more than success. Over time, something shifts. Not control over events, but reliability within yourself. Reactions slow. Not because you are restraining them, but because fewer judgments receive automatic approval. Life does not become smoother. You become less entangled. When this practice becomes stable, a different kind of freedom appears. What freedom actually preserves? Freedom is often misunderstood. It is usually imagined as relief from pressure, fewer demands, easier circumstances, cooperative people, predictable outcomes. By this definition, freedom depends entirely on what happens outside you. When conditions shift, freedom disappears. Stoic discipline points to a different understanding. Freedom is not the absence of difficulty. It is the absence of internal compulsion. It is the condition in which nothing outside you can force agreement inside you. Events still occur. Loss still happens. Inconvenience remains. What changes is not the world, but the location of authority. This freedom is narrow, but stable. When judgment is trained, reactions are no longer automatic. Not eliminated, but optional. You still feel pressure, but you are not dragged by it. You still register discomfort, but you are not ordered by it. This is what is preserved, the ability to choose without being rushed. Life does not become easier through this practice. That expectation must be dropped early. Problems continue. People remain inconsistent. Plans fail. Bodies age. None of this is corrected by discipline. Stoicism never promised comfort. What it preserves is sovereignty. Without this sovereignty, every external change rearranges your internal state. Praise lifts you. Criticism destabilizes you. Delays irritate you. Approval reassures you. Disapproval unsettles you. You live in constant response mode, adjusting internally to external signals. With sovereignty, the signals still arrive, but they do not dictate. You receive information without surrendering command. You can decide what requires action and what does not. This distinction reduces unnecessary movement inside the mind. Freedom here is not expressive. It is restraining. Not in the sense of suppression, but in the sense of containment. You are no longer compelled to display every judgment, defend every interpretation, or resolve every discomfort immediately. This kind of freedom is quiet. It does not announce itself. Others may not notice it at all. In fact, it often looks like indifference from the outside. But internally, it is precision. Comfort seeks ease. Freedom seeks alignment. Comfort depends on conditions cooperating. Freedom depends on judgment remaining intact. This is why comfort is fragile and freedom is durable. One is granted. The other is maintained. Maintenance is the correct word. Freedom is not achieved once and then possessed. It is upheld moment by moment through the same discipline that created it. The pause before assent does not disappear with experience. It becomes more familiar, not obsolete. There is no final state where impressions stop arriving or judgments stop proposing themselves. Expecting that leads to frustration. The work continues because life continues. This understanding prevents disappointment. You are not practicing to arrive somewhere. You are practicing to remain steady where you are. The authority you regain is limited, but it is sufficient. You cannot control outcomes. You cannot control others. You cannot control whether difficulty appears. You can control whether difficulty becomes disturbance. That distinction is everything. When judgment remains under your command, reaction loses its urgency. You can act decisively without agitation. You can remain silent without suppression. You can speak without discharge. These are signs of freedom, not restraint. Nothing outside you must change for this to begin. No one must behave differently. No condition must improve. The only requirement is that you stop handing over agreement without examination. This freedom does not protect you from loss. It protects you from being ruled by it. Nothing more needs to be added. the work that remains yours. This ends where responsibility begins. Nothing described here requires escalation, intensity, or personality change. It requires only that you stop abandoning the one point that was always yours. Before every reaction, before every word spoken too quickly or judgment carried too far, there is a moment that does not belong to circumstance. It belongs to you. The mistake was never emotion. It was never sensitivity. It was never the presence of pressure. The mistake was the quiet habit of agreement. The reflexive assent that went unnoticed and therefore unchallenged. Stoic discipline does not ask you to become flawless. It asks you to become precise. You will still miss pauses. You will still assent too quickly. You will still react in ways you later recognize as unnecessary. None of this invalidates the practice. It defines it. Responsibility cannot be outsourced here. No explanation dissolves it. No context removes it. You are not blamed for impressions, but you are accountable for what you approve. This accountability is not moral punishment. It is operational clarity. The work is simple, but it is not easy. It consists of returning, again and again, to the same point. Not correcting the past. Not predicting the future. Just noticing what is happening now and withholding agreement until reason is present. You are not asked to justify yourself. You are not asked to defend calm. You are not asked to explain restraint. You are asked to remain aligned with what is yours when pressure appears. This alignment does not make you passive. It makes action cleaner. When judgment is intact, action follows without excess. When assent is deliberate, speech loses its edge. When reaction slows, choice becomes visible. Nothing here promises comfort. Nothing guarantees ease. What it offers is reliability. A mind that does not scatter under provocation. A response that does not outrun judgment. A form of freedom that does not depend on conditions cooperating. This is maintained, not achieved. Each day offers the same work. Each impression invites the same decision. There is no finish line. There is only practice. Return to what is yours.